Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Now, we've had another Power Word update, and this one needs a video of its own. For it, we're going to be talking about the changes and lack of changes that the developers have iterated on this post they just posted today, talking about a number of active spells, some changes for Discipline, some changes for Holy, and then I'm going to give some of my thoughts on what they could be doing, or should be doing, in my opinion, to be able to sort of rectify this. For those who haven't read it, I'll go over some of the highlights, but I won't read the entire thing. Link to the description below. But this was kind of a gut punch when it came to how Holy and Disc Priest, at least, interpret a lot of these changes, and I'm sure they were the same way for Shadow Priest too, where they kind of went down the line, going over a number of changes that they were making and how they would probably make people unhappy, and then iterating upon why they are doubling down and why they are definitely not going to make any sort of change. Whether it was utility, whether it was movement, what you name it, really, they went across the board and developed their thoughts on the matter, fleshed them out a little bit more, and then managed to make a whole lot of people quite angry. So, let's get ourselves started with the setup that they have going on. First and foremost, they agree that Priest has too many active spells, and what they really determine as active spells are abilities you're weaving into the mix quite frequently. And it is fair to say that Shadow Mend having an only 15-second cooldown is actually fairly accurate, that you have to kind of mix it in frequently, and it's a bit of an odd duck sitting there when Holy Priest has a number of different cooldowns to be able to mix in. When Disc Priest, for example, is going to be using Renew or Flash Shield to apply their atonements instead of primarily Shadow Mend. And so, as a result, they're looking at getting rid of Shadow Mend entirely, which, of course, hurts Disc Priest in PvP for not having a second spell school, and they're not sure if they are 100% going to be doing it, but they are also thinking about what they want to do with Mind Games and Power Word Life as the number of active spells, which is kind of weird because they designed these things. It's almost like they put all of these different designs and set up into the game, and then we started testing it, and then they said, oh wait, now there's too many spells that we added. It's very strange to see, Mind Games and Powered Life listed under this sort of umbrella, because this was their idea to bring into the mix. It's not like, oh hey, well we have Shadow Mend in the last expansion, we're going to bring it into this one, but oh, it doesn't really fit in our designs. You know what I mean? But it's very, very strange in that regard. Mind Games, personally, as nice as it is for Disc Priest, I would not actually feel too bad, because it's an odd sort of power increase that you're getting from your class tree to weave into your spec, and I think I'd be alright if all of our powers, all our bonuses as a Disc Priest were specifically in our spec tree, or majority of them. It feels like Mind Games kind of rides the same line as Light's Wrath, and if they only want us to have one of those things, I'd much rather have Light's Wrath. It's way cooler, and so it wouldn't really be the end of the world. For 5-mans or whatever, Mind Games for Disc or for Holy, doesn't really feel that great. Powered Life, now that they've improved its uptime or its use for its breakpoint to 35% instead of 20%, it's a bit better. But I'm not really that big of a fan of the spell, or I'm not too tied to it at the moment, and I really don't think that we're going to be pressing it massive amounts in 5-man environments, at least from what I've seen so far from the dungeons. It seems like one of those quick snipe abilities you'll be able to use maybe a handful of times, maybe a dozen times throughout a dungeon that could last 30 minutes, so not like you're really going to be dropping it all of the time. Now, when it comes to Discipline, of course, they start talking about what's going to happen with the removal of Shadow Mend. They also very politely tell everybody to calm the hell down about Renew and Power Word Shields interactions. Of course, you're going to be using Renew to apply your atonements now instead of Power Word Shield spam. I personally think it's a good thing. It's a little bit weird with Renew, obviously, we know, but I want Power Word Shield to feel strong. And they start talking about that as well. They already have their builds revolving around Penance, but they also want to be able to have some that are investing around Smite and Power Word Shield. They fixed up the Smite effect level 2, so it actually is going to be stronger. The last build that it had, Smite was just terrible as a spell. And now they talk about Shadow Covenant once again. They said, hey, we took away the downside so that you don't discourage holy spells. But now they're already talking about getting rid of Shadow Mend. So what the hell are you going to be casting during your Shadow Covenant? You've got Schism, you've got maybe Mind Games if it stays. You can go into a double tap of Death and Madness, or Shadow or Death, excuse me, if you talent into Death and Madness, so you can hit Shadow or Death twice. You've got, Mind Blast, and think that's about it if they're getting rid of mind games on top of it. I probably missed one. But you just don't have a lot of abilities to be able to cast. You have Divine Star. That's the other one I was thinking of. But Penance is still going to be the same. I don't know why you would really want to talent into Dark Reprimand either. And it's just extra talent points for an ability that isn't going to be that good when Shadow Mend is actually gone. So, very, very strange with what they have going on at the moment. If anything, I'm kind of surprised that they didn't actually do more of a conversation about the sort of differences between Aegis of Wrath, which has been buffed in this latest build, to really beef up Powered Shield Strength. It also gets better with Divine Aegis, where your crit shields will absorb even more on top of the regular crit. And then you have things like Train of Thought, which are giving you cooldown reduction for Powered Shield by casting Flash Shield Renew, or Shadow Mend, but we know that's going to be gone now. So I thought that would be more of a conversation from the devs on that end, because it seems almost like this left side of the tree, with these Powered Shield punching abilities, is meant to compete with the Shadow Flame Prism damage-oriented side with Bender, Expiation, Fiending Dark, cooldown reduction goodies, as you could run Mind Bender and Shadow Flame Prism to deal damage to heal, or you could just beef up your Powered Shields and make Rapture a really strong cooldown and all this other stuff. And those are the two different variants, potentially, of how you could actually play in a key environment. And I'm kind of surprised they didn't touch on that a little bit more, because I think that should be a very important conversation as we start getting closer and closer to Beta Mythic Plus. And it didn't really seem to happen. I'm also very surprised that there's nothing in there about independent variables. I know I've harped on this a million times in my disc videos, but I'm very surprised that they have no comment whatsoever on scaling Atonement's output in a 5-man environment to properly support the spec, because it's needed it for an extremely long time, which is why I'm kind of leaning towards this Aegis of Wrath, Powered Shield boosting build, as maybe the answer to Disc's woes in a 5-man environment. But, again, we're going to have to see. Very weird, again, that they don't really have any hint of irony with the whole Shadow Covenant and no longer having Shadow Mend, but it is what it is. Holy Tree starts off with a bit of a backpat when it comes to Lightweaver. I've talked up Lightweaver previously in our videos, and that it's a superior design to Flash Concentration. Rather than a maintenance spell, it's a builder spender, so you're able to build stacks and spend them freely without having to hold on to them or anything like that. Now, this is a very important part if you're watching the video all the way through and not skipping chapters, because what they do to Holy Priest Zanshi, which they call Restitution, is really important. They rightfully point out, hey, it's very strong, having it super high up in the tree, another thing I mentioned in my video, super powerful, way too good, blah, 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 blah. And so, they fairly drop it into the bottom of the tier. I don't really like specifically where it's positioned around Searing Light damage and Answered Prayers, which gives Apotheosis, which we also talked about in our last video. I don't really like exactly where it's positioned, but the idea that, hey, if you'd like to have this res, you're going to have to give up some output and maybe go out of your way, but the benefit, if you put a high enough emphasis on it, could be well worth your time and your talent points. And that's just a generally good idea for how all talent should work. If something is very powerful and very useful, basically an immune effect where you can go die and then res again without consuming a battle res, there's crazy amounts of uses for that, or guilds can find them, as long as it doesn't have too heavy of an impact on your output. And that, I think, is just a sweet spot for talent selection, and they're constantly changing up talent placement every week, so hopefully they're going to be able to find a decent enough place. Personally, wouldn't mind to see it a little bit more central, or having a couple different paths to be able to get to it. That'd be awesome. So with that, again, Holy Priest is also not going to be able to have access to Shadow Mend, which means that you're going to be leaning very, very heavily into all of the single targets spells that you can. Keep in mind, it's just a random talent build. This isn't like a guide or anything. Please keep that in mind. But there's just a 9-point street almost that you can just fly down, which gives you all kinds of buffs for your single target. And to be honest, I think Holy Priest's best build at the moment in a raiding environment could be a single target one, which you might love if you love Flash Concentration, and if you didn't, you might hate. But part of the reasoning for this is the fact that they have a very odd split between Renew / Prayer of Mending, which slopes off to the right side, between Prayer of Healing and Sanctify, which is relegated to this awkward left side corner, and then they have Flash Heal and Heal buffs, which go right down the middle into the left side, kind of perfectly where you'd like to go. For any prayer of healing focus build, you kind of have to cross the street almost of Everlasting Light or Crisis Management in order to get to Prismatic Echoes, which every single build is going to want because everybody wants to make their mastery better, particularly at the start of expansions. So I'd say one of the big problems right now with Holy Priest is definitely how their tree is made up and the routes that you're able to take to get what you need if they want to theoretically make a Prayer of Healing, AoE, Sanctify based build work effectively. Of course, you can take it, but there's always that sort of sacrifice that other builds, like a single target oriented build, would not necessarily have. Now, we've talked generally about both Holy and Disc. Let's start getting into specifically when we're looking at the adjustments that they're making to these various specs. Silence. They say, we understand Holy and Disc are the two specs without access to an interrupt. And we also realize that Shadow has silence in their tree. We're not adding silence to the class tree. Having access to the interrupt is not something we view as necessary for all specializations, even though 36 specs out of 38 in the game can actually have access to it. And my biggest beef is just like what I was talking about when it came to Zanshi, is that if you're going to go after something special like Zanshi, it's going to cost you a lot to be able to get there. I think that Paladins offer a really good example of how kick should work, in that you need to slope immediately into the right side, immediately into a damage-focused build, in order to be able to take it. I think that's overall a pretty good way to be able to go about doing so. I think Evoker also does it pretty well also, where you're pushed off to the left to be able to get Quell, instead of going further down into the tree where you're grabbing things like mobility or movement speed or just better healing output, dispels, and the like. It costs you something and you're committing down that path, and I don't think it would be incredibly difficult for them to do something similar with Holy Priest, particularly with how unlikely it is to really touch great swaths of the right side tree, like where Vamp Embrace lives or Sand Lane lives or Apathy over to this far right side, making it actually cost something to be able to go invest in it. And they could also, quite frankly, make it easy to make it a very lengthy CD and not that good, and that would be fine, because I don't need to have some 15-second interrupt like everybody else to feel good. I would just like to have access to something if I'm out leveling as Holy or Disc, or I'm killing rares and one of them has a cast which heals and then I can't fear it or something because it's elite, something along those lines, just to be able to help myself out, or to be able to help out my team if it's desperately needed in some key environment or some raid environment, God forbid. Very strange. Vault of the Heavens. Quick TLDR is that this is the reverse grip. It allows you to grip to your target instead of gripping the target to you. And as much as they talk up how fun Leap of Faith is, they say, oh yeah, Vault of the Heavens is almost always more useful. Which seems like a kind of a bad indictment for Leap of Faith if you ask me. But they go on to say, yeah, it's fun, it changes your perspective on the battlefield, which is true. You always want to make sure you have your eyes up so you can save somebody, and that's fair. But, again, this goes into, we didn't want to make it some kind of choice node against Leap of Faith, and this is what bothers me about the rest of these posts, is they frame the problem as one thing and they say, we just can't do it. And that drives me insane, because you could just look at the bottom of this class tree for Priest and see there's plenty of opportunities to be able to make choice nodes down here where you say, hey, you can take Void Shift or Vault of the Heavens. You can take Bulwark or Vault of the Heavens. Hell, I'd even take Mind Games or Vault of the Heavens, whatever it is that you want to do. But making it have a capstone, making it be at the bottom of the tree, you can still have Leap of Faith up at the top and say, hey, you have to spec into Leap of Faith at the top, and you have to spec into Vault of the Heavens at the bottom in order to make it work. I would much, much rather prefer some of these options, because as far as I'm concerned, the bottom of the class tree for Priest, for Holy, and Discipline is kind of a barren wasteland when it comes to just good value. I think a lot of the defensive traits are very poor. Crystalline Reflection for Holy is very poor. For Disc, it's like decent passive damage. This Fade cooldown reduction is poor. They made Translucent Image a bit better. Mind Games feels useless for Holy in a Raid or Mythic Plus environment. And Holy Word Life is like a niche ability. There's some good sprinkled in, no doubt. But if ever they were to make these choice nodes, whether it's for Shining Force, where they say, there's more knockbacks that are coming into the game, and we don't want to have too many of them, and they start worrying about Arena or battleground maps. Now, I'm not a PvPer, but I've done enough PvP at the start of expansions and the start of new raid tiers that I was never told to take Shining Force. If anything, I was taking 30-second Fear. So that's a very strange comment that they had about those, as if they were worried about people getting knocked off battleground maps and platforms. Odd. Spectral Guise. This was just a fun, crazy, awesome ability, and that'll let you basically go into stealth, and it was pretty much having access to Night Elf Shadow Melt. And then they say, hey, we don't want priests entering stealth, especially in PvP. But you could just switch to whatever race that you want these days. So it's very, very strange. And it's not like there wasn't Arena back then when Spectral Guise was an actual ability, like it was in Warlords of Draenor, which I think was the last time that we had access to it. And they already had hunters, rogues, and mages doing this often enough as is. If anything, arenas are more advanced than ever with all the add-ons that are allowed in the game at the moment to be able to fix this sort of problem. So again, the way that these problems are designed and saying, we just are worried about PvP, geez. And it reminds me of what we saw out of the class tree for the new Dominate Mind, if you see it at the bottom middle of your screen, which they're splitting off from Mind Control, allowing you to Mind Control a target for 30 seconds, but they make it so it doesn't work on demonic, mechanical, undead beings, or players. I know it's a bit of a stretch because it's a knockback, but how are we not able to have Shining Force not affect players? How are we not able to have other abilities not affect players? How are we not able to have like specific wording on talents to say this will not work in a PvP environment? That stuff just bothers me because they already have PvP talents implemented into the game that they pretty consistently iterate upon. And I was actually really excited that a lot of cool talents from PvP get pushed into PvE. I think things like Aegis of Wrath, if I remember correctly, being one of them, was pretty awesome. For Holy Priest getting Miracle Worker for more Serenity and Sanctified charges, pretty awesome. Not the best talent, but pretty awesome. And then it's just strange that we can't do these things in reverse order, like the technology doesn't exist. Not really sure why, but that stuff continues to bother me. The Mind Bomb I won't dig too much into because Holy and Dis never had access to it. And they also say, hey, we're not going to add Disperse back to the class tree, or to the class tree. And I think that's fine. I can't really imagine having a Holy Disperse. That never really bothered me to begin with, and I don't know of any healer priests that were asking for Disperse. While they acknowledge that, hey, they're on the weaker side, their answer isn't to bring it to the class tree, that's fine. But when they don't actually give a solution, and they say, oh yeah, Desperate Prayer, Power Word, Shield, Bulwark, Image, Spell Ward, we think they're okay. That really bothers me, because I don't think that they're in a okay spot. I don't think Power Word Shield is a good feeling defensive. It's a bit better in terms of its shielding compared to Shadowlands, where it did almost nothing. But, and I talked about this on Max's stream when he had me on today, why doesn't Crystalline Reflection also increase the absorb amount onto yourself? Why isn't Holy Word Life or some other passive competing at the bottom of the tree, or something like Angelic Bulwark, which means whenever you shield yourself, you're shielding yourself for 10-15% more? Why isn't Light's Inspiration increasing the health bonus that Desperate Prayer gives you? You already have Angel's Mercy here, you already have Desperate Prayer baseline. Why isn't Light's Inspiration further buffing that? Don't know anybody who would want to have a 5-second health hot over 5 seconds after you already activated Desperate Prayer. Why is it not further increasing your maximum health? Not everything needs to be damage reduction. We already have Translucent Image, and that's fine. But if they're anticipating Powered Shield being a defensive for us, or anticipating, Desperate Prayer being enough of a defensive, why aren't we getting even more modifiers to really improve them, instead of these conduits, which for the entirety of the expansion, we rejected? We had the entire expansion of Light's Inspiration from Shadowlands as a conduit available to us, and it was like our third option if we even ran a Soulbind tree that allowed for 3 endurance conduits, which was rare enough as is. So it boggles the imagination as to why that this stayed in its current form and had no iterations whatsoever. Why aren't we having movement speed of Vault of the Heavens competing with defensive value from Angelic Bulwark? Bulwark, by the way, is just a worse Waking Dreams if you see it from your Dreamweaver Soulbind. Waking Dreams was giving you a 20% health shield after you take damage below 80% with a 1-minute ICD. This is giving you a 15% of your max health shield for a little bit longer, but you have to get knocked below 30 first. In my experience, if you're getting knocked down that low, you're already going to be at risk of death, and having it going up to 45%, it might help a bit, but I would much rather be getting a shield as quickly as possible, as frequently as possible, so I'm not getting knocked down low to begin with. It can frequently happen where you might step in something, and then a raid hit happens, and then you get comboed and die, and having something earlier activate to be able to shield you can prevent something like that. Overall, I'm pretty damn disappointed from this post, not only because they pretty much shot down a lot of ideas and a lot of hopes that the spec had, but they also framed it in a way that there was nothing else that could be done. Or that there's one problem and it's just PvP, and because PvP, all the player-verse environment, all the raiders, all the Mythic Plus players are not able to have this cool toy. And I know that no spec's gonna get everything, of course, but it's very frustrating when they start talking about, oh, well, these defensives are enough, they're okay. Instead of saying, hey, we're not fully happy with it, we're gonna start looking towards this class tree and start seeing what we can improve and start seeing what adjustments can be made, you know? All those things are very confusing to me, and I can only hope that they start taking some of the feedback that myself and everybody who calls themselves a priest has been throwing at them lately. Let me know what you guys think. Obviously, keep it positive as best as you possibly can, but this is very frustrating with the eve almost of Beta Mythic Plus and raid testing probably right around the corner. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.